welcome everybody back again for another episode from the Healing Fanatic. Again, my name's Aaron Nicolaitis, otherwise known as Dr. A. And today I have a very kind of a fun, I wanted to do this episode for a long time because this is one of the things I absolutely see probably the very most in my practice. When I have been doing mental health for a very long time, 20 plus years, again, as I have stated, if you haven't watched my intro to the podcast, please go back and do so. That'll give you a little bit of information about, kind of what I'm about, what I'm going to be talking about. Today's episode is specifically going to be talking about survival mode versus living mode. There's a big difference when it comes to living versus surviving. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, I just want to let you know this is a conversation. I'm not going to have a lot of things scripted. So, a lot of podcasts you hear out there to me are just very scripted. They take away the ums and the buts and all this stuff. But I just want to have a conversation with you like we're sitting in a car in the same room, just having a chat. That's what I want to do the very, very most. And so I'm not going to script a lot. I'm just going to ad lib. I'm going to tell you what I've seen, what I know, and how we can solve some problems. That's really my goal on this. So let me begin. Let me ask you a question. How many of you would honestly say you're living to survive? Ponder that for 1 second. How many of you are living to survive? Now, many of you, if you're honest, would say, yeah, absolutely. And I would say that's true. The vast majority of people that I've experienced in my life are truly living in survival mode. What does that mean? How does that happen? Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. But in essence, how many of you are living paycheck to paycheck, as an example? The economy in the United States is horrible, and it's not good in other parts of the world either. Banks are closing down. A lot of interest rates are going up. So people are kind of being pushed into a survival mode scenario. But if it's not economically, maybe it's just emotionally. Are you living in survival mode, just trying to get through the day? I don't have enough energy. Maybe I have some depression. Maybe I have a little bit of anxiety. Maybe I have trauma. Maybe I have alcohol and addiction problems. Maybe you're experiencing grief and you're just struggling to get through each day. Those are some examples of living in survival mode. Now, that's on an individual basis. Now, let me ask you another question. If I was to ask you, looking around the society or the culture in which you live right now, how would you know, or what are some of the effects on society when it comes to living in survival mode? As a society, as a community, as a town, as a state, as a nation, how do you know? Well, think big picture a little bit. So, what would typically happen for those who are living in survival mode? Well, in my world, in the field of psychology, social work, therapy, these are the things I'm going to see. And this is how I know we've got some issues out here of people living in survival mode. Addiction rates up through the roof. Overdoses, from accidental overdoses to suicide, going up. Family break apart. Families that are no longer together, going up. Divorce rates, going up. Spending more time with distractions. That could be anything. Maybe you're addicted to exercise and you can't stop. Maybe, you'll do anything. Maybe you're addicted to reading and you can't stop. Do you have a balance in life? Many people don't have a good balance where the vast majority of their time is surviving. And those are the kind of things I'm going to talk about, because while our brain is in survival mode, a lot of things can happen. And yes, get used to me talking about the brain a lot, because when our brain is having a problem, It's not like you want to wake up in survival mode. It's not like people say, "Hey, Aaron, Doc, I really do not want to feel good today. I'm gonna live in survival mode today." It just doesn't happen. It's just an automatic thing. We get into a cycle, but the problem is we don't get off that cycle. We don't jump off that train, and then it begins to cause problems. Okay. Now, a lot of times when we think about survival, we're thinking, okay, so what am I doing to survive? Well, sometimes it's just coping, getting up every day and going, man, okay, so today, man, I'm just not gonna drink today, or man, I'm just gonna try and make it to work today, or oh, I'm just gonna try and survive the kids. I've got a lot of kids at home, or I'm just overwhelmed, or God, I gotta survive. I've got to survive whatever it is I'm gonna try and do today. Or, are you living in a routine? Every Monday I do this. Every Tuesday I do this. Every Friday I do this. Every Sunday I do this. Is there change? Are there times when you can mix things up? Or is change taboo? Is that something you're like, nope, can't have change because I don't feel like it? I don't feel good. I don't like change. Well, change happens. And you can avoid it all you want, but it will catch you. Because if we're living in survival mode, your body's going to start to shut down. Your mind is going to start to shut down. Spiritually, you're going to shut down. You're going to feel a loss of connection with yourself, with a higher self. All of these things are going to begin to break down. So, what do we do about that? Well, let me give you some examples of things I've seen with survival mode. But first, I want to give you a little bit about our brain, just real quick. All of you probably recognize or have heard the term fight or flight, right? That's that part of your brain that just sets off. It's like here in America, it would be known as the Amber Alert. This thing goes off your phone alerting you of a kidnapping. Well, your brain does the same type of a thing. When it gets triggered, that's in the amygdala, that's part of your brain. What happens is people can freeze, they can fight, they can do a lot of different things. They can run, they can fight, they can freeze. It doesn't matter. People are different. And yeah, there may be more terms about that, but I'm not worried about that. You get the basic concept of what we're talking about. So what happens when the amygdala goes off, that fight or flight goes off, that sends a signal to the other parts of your brain to kind of go into rest mode, is what I like to call it. For example, your frontal cortex, your frontal lobe, doesn't fire up and doesn't function like it's supposed to because it doesn't need to be. That whole part of your body, that whole part of your brain is designed to help regulate emotion. To regulate emotion. If that's not turned on and functioning properly, you're going to be in survival mode. There's just no other way that can happen. Now, people say, well, what triggers that? And that's another discussion, and I will get to that in depth as to what can happen to the brain and how it gets triggered like that. But just for today, the basic concept is when that gets triggered, and that can be triggered for any reason, a lot of different reasons. A smell could trigger you, a memory, a car accident, real life danger. Anything could trigger this. And a lot of times it's unconscious. You're not even aware of what is triggering you. But when that happens repetitively and this frontal part of our brain doesn't function, we quickly go into survival mode. Well, basically, when we're in survival mode, we have a belief. Have you ever thought or heard anybody say, well, this is just as good as it gets? And hey, it is what it is, right? Well, I don't think so. I don't believe that at all. In my opinion, we're truly meant to experience joy, happiness, freedom, and not be tied down by our past or by what our brain is telling us to experience. We get a lot of things told to us throughout the day as we grow up. Society tells us a lot of things. You should act this way. You should believe these things. You're going to get that from religion. You're going to get that from school. You're going to get that from parents, from your culture, a lot of different places. Your experience and what you experience in life is gonna um, tell us a really good idea about how your brain is functioning and how you're doing. Are you stuck in a certain mentality like, this is what my mom and dad taught me, so this is the way it's going to be forever? Well, okay, so your mom and dad taught you to beat the hell out of your kids, so that means you're going to too? Okay. Or I didn't have to go to school because I'm just fine. I made it just fine. Great. That was 50 years ago. Today's world is different. Each generation has their own challenges. Me, I'm a Gen Xer. In other words, I'm in my early 50s. So to me, I experienced a lot of things, but very, very different than what, say, my children now are growing up with and experiencing. The youth of today are under the most pressure that they've ever been that I can think of. They are getting pressure from everywhere, and partly from social media, partly from school, partly from expectations of society, partly from the pressure to go to college, partly from religion. It's everywhere. Kids are suffering more and more. Suicide rates are higher. This is what we call survival mode. Kids are honestly trying to just survive to get through school, just survive their childhood and their adolescence, because society wants them to grow up faster. They want them to make adult decisions now, faster, when they're not capable of. Their brain isn't even developed to make those kind of choices and decisions, but yet we as a society and as a world have sent the message loud and clear. Do it faster, more effective, and get going. Don't celebrate, just keep going, 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 going. I have some major, major problems with that. So let me talk a little bit about what I see from a lot of my clients when it comes to survival mode. And let me talk about trauma for a minute. How many of you have ever had a really impacting experience in your life that has changed the way you think, changed the way you react, changed your future? And that could be anything. It could be abuse and neglect, physical, emotional, sexual, psychological abuse for sure, right? Or it could be a bad car accident. Or how about losing a job? Or how about having problems in school and being told you're stupid? Okay, how many of you have a belief that you're not good enough? You're not worthy. You're not lovable. How many of you experience an eating disorder? Or how many of you have relationship issues and there's a pattern, keeps going over and over and over and over? How many of you have that problem? These are symptoms of survival. We're going to do things to avoid pain. The problem is we get stuck. So we avoid the world. We distract. We do not want to feel anything. I would rather have physical pain than emotional pain. That is what I hear very common from my clients and those who I work with closely. They would rather feel physical pain than emotional pain because they can almost justify the physical pain. Like, I'd rather break an arm than have someone stab me in the back or betray me, or admit that my mom or dad may have been wrong, or having to let go of the alcoholic sibling who's destroying our lives. I would rather not feel that. I'd rather not feel the pain of someone abusing me or remembering that. So I will distract. Well, in today's world, let me ask you, how do you guys distract yourselves? How do you distract yourselves? What's some of the most common things we see in our world to distract? Well, how about social media? How many of you spend a lot of time on social media? And you can say, there are those that are going to say, oh, but Dr. A, it's because it's my job. Okay, well, if you have a job, I'm not talking about that. How about in your free time? Or how many of you are on social media while you're at work? That's huge too. Man, it's just a quick tap of the phone and you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're on TikTok, whatever it takes, right? You're going to distract because you don't want to feel anything. You want to get your mind off of what's going on, because if you stay within what you're supposed to be doing or what's coming into your senses, that can be overwhelming. You don't want it, so you distract. How about alcohol and drugs? That's a distraction from feeling. I don't want to feel. I'm going to numb out. How about reading books? I'm not talking just for learning. I'm talking about just leisurely books that don't mean a whole lot. It's just junk books. People are going to get mad at that statement too. It's not junk. All these authors are probably going to write at me and tear me up a new one. I don't care, because people can use this. I'm not talking just leisurely reading. How many of you are using it to escape as a distraction? TV, Netflix movies, or going to the movies, or using anything you can. Maybe it's going to the gym and distracting myself there. Or even worse, how about the workaholic? How many of you work more than you need to? I understand people have to work but that again is going to be survival mode. If you're working too much, not having a balance of rest and fun enjoyment, there's a problem. Oh, but Aaron, I like to work. I bet you do. It's called being in survival mode. Okay. Now, this is generally speaking. People are going to probably email me and say, but you're wrong. I do this for this and this. I'm like, great. Do what you want to do. All I'm going to do is highlight some things. And if they apply to you, great. If they don't, I don't care. Because if we get down to it, the vast majority of you are living in survival mode. And the goal is to figure out a way to balance. How do I live more? So let me talk about living for a minute. Talked about survival. How do I live? What does it look like? Well, let me ask you this. Do you know anybody who truly doesn't have a whole lot of care, meaning they just live free? They're not just tossed to and from the wind, but they just live okay. They're not rattled. They're not emotionally rattled. They're just stable. They might feel all the emotions, but it never shuts them down. It's never too much. That is a good sign of someone who is living. Or someone who is living, how about judgment? Do you think a person who's living life is out there, literally out there judging people in a harsh way, being very critical? My argument is no, not at all. Those people who are out there judging, I know a lot of quote unquote healers. Let's take healers for, and I'll get into this along the with other podcasts, because this is one of my favorite topics to talk about when it comes to those who profess healing. Whether you're doing massage, or whether you're doing Reiki, whether you're doing energy work, whether you're doing, it doesn't matter to me. You name whatever people go to, shaman, doesn't matter. If they're out there walking around and they're like, oh, I have this, and I'm wearing these beautiful clothing to show off, and I'm wearing these dirt necklaces and these crystals and whatever, I don't really care what you got looking on or what you say. If you're out there sitting there judging people, you got a big problem. And that's not what I would consider living. That's what I would call the survival. Because you're justifying your own existence. I don't feel good enough, so I'm going to tear them down so that I can be okay. That's survival. Living is being truly okay within yourself. Truly being okay with who you are as a soul, mentally, emotionally, as a physical body. You're just good. Does that mean that you've arrived? No, the person who is living has this mental attitude, this spiritual thirst for more. They want more knowledge. They want more experience. The material things tend to kind of go away. They don't matter as much. Yeah, they can enjoy them, but they don't need them to define themselves. Many people need that car, that job title, the house, keeping up with other people, judging. Those people are not living. They might think so, like, oh, I went on a new weekend with my boating buddies and we went out with our ATVs and okay, whatever. That could also be distraction. So be careful when you look at other people and say, oh my God, they're living such a good life. Those people could very well be living in survival mode. Now, another example, living in survival mode. Let's talk about relationships. How many of you are in a relationship or have had relationships where you were just surviving it? Just doing the best you could to hang on. Male, female, doesn't matter to me. I don't care what the relationship is. How many of you have survived it or are surviving it? I would say a lot. A lot. And people nowadays are getting to the point, and this is partially why the divorce rate is higher from what I'm seeing. Okay, this is my opinion. What I'm seeing is a lot of people getting divorced because they're not satisfied with their partner for a variety of reasons. That could be growth. That person's not willing to grow. Or they felt like they helped them along the path and now they're just not needed anymore. Or they they've grown themselves and found out that they had settled, or that person had done them right and it worked for a long, long time, but now it's not working anymore for them. And so they're going out to seek that next best person for them. Maybe it's a soulmate, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it is what it is. But it's interesting to hear surveys come out when people are asked, are you married to your best friend? Overwhelmingly, the answer is no. They are not. And so people are now at the point in society where it's not taboo to get a divorce or to separate. Now, am I in favor of that? Not necessarily, but I'm just pointing out a lot of good things. But in some cases, hey, I'm in favor of what it takes for you to feel happy. That's my bottom line. And I'm not going to sit back here and judge that for you because it's your experience and what you get to have in life. Now, living in survival mode is literally going to happen, survival mode, if your brain's not working. So how do you get your brain working right? Well, because people are wondering, okay, Aaron, I've heard enough of this. Tell me what I need to do. Well, let me give you a few ideas and some things you need to work on or that can do for yourselves. Positive affirmations are huge. And those are the things, that's the self-talk. Really monitor, be aware. I want you to become more mindful of what you're doing and why you're doing it. What you're saying and why you're saying it. What you believe, why do you believe it? Where did that belief come? Was that belief handed down to you from tradition? Was that belief handed to you from school? Was that belief handed to you from religion? Where did you get that belief in about you and what mode you're in? Okay. What about getting some good therapy? Now, in my opinion, talk therapy can be beneficial, just going in and talking, but I think it's limited. And this is the part where a lot of therapists are going to jump on here and go, oh my God, you're talking blasphemy to the therapist religion here. No, I'm not. I'm saying it's a good thing, but it has its limits. Because if I'm sitting here talking to your brain, your physical brain that is not working right, tell me how that's going to help you or anybody in general. Explain that to me. I'll wait. I'm happy to debate this with somebody. Because if the brain is not functioning properly, the frontal lobe, that part right here that runs your emotions, isn't even firing, how can anyone expect you to control your emotion and therefore not be in survival mode? Let me give you my experience over 20 years of doing mental health and working with people. The brain that is not working can only function and have success to a certain point. They might be doing okay, but their optimal level of functioning is not going to be achieved unless they are functioning at its best. Let me repeat that. The brain that is not functioning and firing properly, and part of that includes this whole frontal lobe and turning off that fight or flight so that you can breathe, so your body can relax, you're never going to achieve the results that you want. You're going to be living in survival mode. So many people have no idea how to do this. One of those things that I use is meditation, and I also use EMDR. People are like, what is EMDR, Aaron? Well, it's becoming more and more common, but basically it's an acronym, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Basically, and I'll get into the science of this later, or you can go do your research on your own, it's out there. Basically, my goal in doing this is to get the brain working bilaterally, again, getting both hemispheres to talk. By the firing of the neurons going back and forth in the brain, that's going to turn off that fight or flight, and it's going to reignite that first part of your brain. I have watched this happen every time, over and over for 20 years. It works every time because it's just brain science. This is neuroscience we're talking about. Doesn't matter if I believe it or not. This is what's going to happen with the brain. This is why it's imperative that we use science in this field of psychology and in health and social work and other professions of healing, because we can, if we don't do that, then everything else is a temporary fix. It's a Band-Aid fix and nothing more. Because if your brain's not working right, you're going to continue to recreate physical problems, emotional problems, and just because you meditate one day doesn't mean you're going to be fixed forever. This kind of treatment lasts a lot longer. It just lasts longer. I have seen people then come out of survival mode and they have tears of joy because they had never experienced the emotion of being free. They have been living in survival mode day in, day out for 20, 30, 40, 50, even 60 years. And they come and they experience what it's like to be free from that brain, to turn the brain on so that it's functioning properly. They now have control. They now have a choice on what they want to do, how they want to feel. They're no longer concerned about what other people think, how they look, what will people say. That goes away. If you're worried about all those things, you're living in survival mode. You're living in survival mode. I don't care if you're doing it or not. That's up to you. If you like living in survival mode, more power to you. I'm just not a fan because I believe human life, again, is to have the most fun, experience the most joy that we can possibly experience. But this world is a huge distraction. It's chaotic. It's stressful. And all of those things combined have an impact on us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. All of them do. So, wrapping up real quick, survival mode is what? Like if I was to ask you now, what is survival mode? What does it look like? Could you tell me? I hope so. Can I ask you about what living is? What can you do to live? If you're not dreaming and growing, you're not living. Living is being open to experiences, new ones, whether they're comfortable or not. Finding new ways to feel joy. Breaking out of this box that you're living in. Expanding your belief system or challenging it. All of these things are what we call living. It's living. Okay? All right. I guess it's going to wrap it up for this episode of survival versus living mode. Again, feel free to comment. Send me in your stories of how you've experienced going from survival to living. I'd love to hear your stories. Or if you have questions, if you have specific questions about this topic, feel free to give me an email. thehealingfanatic@gmail.com. It'll see on your screen here or below in the commentary. Also, please share the podcast. I'd love to get more people's input. And again, have a great day. And please live. Just live. Have a good day, guys. Bye.